Hello, BookTube. We're back down in puppy territory for more of a library tour. This is a bottom shelf, crammed three deep in stacks of mass market paperbacks, which is where the mass market paperbacks have ended up. They once ruled the roost, but now there's just about 300 of them that are just buried down at the bottom of the floor, so that I'm never going to casually grab them off the shelf because it requires getting down onto the floor, pulling out stacks of books, and looking at what I have. This is really a call to replace these things, or get rid of them under the sad but true acknowledgement that I'm never going to replace them and never going to use them again, one way or another. Before we get to that, I've got a stack of books I want to show you here. But before we do that, last time we did this, I ended with a Star Trek book. An unappealing looking thing, Star Trek The Next Generation novel. This is part of a six-part book called Red Sector, about a disease that infects all the various timelines, time periods of Star Trek. And this is book number 3, Double Helix. And as you can see from the cover, it stars a very old Dr. McCoy and a very old Mr. Spock, and a whole bunch of other characters. And the only reason that I got it and read it and loved it is because it's by Diane Carey, who's my favorite Star Trek writer. And in that last video, I was looking for a quote. There's a particular quote in this book that I really like. Perfect combination of Diane Carey combination of vivid description and controlled sentimentality, and I found it. so I want to read it to you because I'm never going to get another chance unless I do a Star Trek starter kit, and this book wouldn't be on it if I did. So those of you who aren't Star Trek fans, you can just skip ahead. But I wanted this is Mr. Spock as an old man entering the bridge of the Enterprise D for the first time. And I wanted to read it to you. For a brief moment, in a frozen pocket of his mind, the carpet changed texture. The bulkheads drained from tan to blue-gray. The rail turned glossy red. Lights dimmed, and there were crisp shadows over his head. More blue, more black, and at the center, that oasis of Mesa gold. The center of his universe, that dot of gold. Which is Captain Kirk. But anyway, now we'll move on to the stack of books. We've got plenty more to go. Oh my god, this bottom shelf alone will last us until summertime. But the first one is Murder Mystery Series, set in ancient Rome. I cannot recommend it highly enough. They are so addictively readable, even though they're crammed full of anachronisms. Maybe because they're crammed full of anachronisms. This is David Wishart. This is his book Ovid. Marcus Corvinus is his two-fisted, tough-talking, crime-solving Roman equestrian, and there's very little attempt in these books to make his Romans sound like Romans, or to sound like characters from historical fiction. This is hard-boiled detective fiction, just transported to ancient Rome, and that's a lot of fun. He does it really well, and he also uses these books sometimes. As you can tell from the title, to delve into actual storylines from the Annals of Tacitus or Suetonius or whatever. And this is one of them. The Roman poet Ovid was exiled to what then was the end of the world, to the edges of the Black Sea, in the middle of nowhere, amongst a people whose language he didn't even speak. He was exiled from the glittering palaces of Rome. For something he did, as he put it, for something he did and something he saw. And he begged for the rest of his life for permission to return to Rome, and never got it. Never got it from Augustus, the man who banished him. Never got it from Tiberius, Augustus's heir, who maintained his exile, despite the fact that members of his own Senate and members of Rome's intellectual elite came to him all the time, saying, "This is an embarrassment. Please bring Ovid back home." And despite the fact that Ovid wrote some of the most beautiful, longing poetry, begging to be allowed to come home. Now, the fascinating thing about that, I mean, intellectuals, writers get banished all the time. The fascinating thing about that is that you often hear that it's impossible to keep a secret. 3 men can keep a secret if 2 are dead, that sort of thing. And yet, after all this time, and despite the fact that it involved a writer, we still don't know what the reason for Ovid's banishment was. He never said so. Never. Even when he was absolutely sure that his exile would never be lifted. And neither did anyone else, because they were afraid of sharing his fate. So we still don't know what the thing is that he saw and what the thing is that he said. We can guess. People have guessed. And this book is all about that. This book has the gold idea to posit that there's some sort of murder mystery involved, which is great. Really, really good. I don't know. These were from New Pomfret, Vermont. These were imports. I don't know if David Wishart is in bookstores anymore. He has a long list of books, and they're all terrific. I don't think I have any other than this one and his book Germanicus. But we shall see, because this is where they'll be if I do. What's next here? Oh, my. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, this is a gem from the 80s. No, from 1977. This is I, Judas, by Taylor Caldwell and Jess Stern. Which is just what you think from the title. It's a historical novel told from the point of view of Judas Iscariot from the New Testament, and it was undertaken and in large part written by Taylor Caldwell, who's now completely forgotten. Taylor Caldwell was once the greatest novelist of the age. Sold just buckets of books. Everybody, you walked into a bookstore, every single bookstore clerk knew the back catalog, title by title by title, because you had to, because everybody's going to come in asking for it now. Completely gone. Sic transit Gloria Mundi. And Jess Stern was a frequent ideological collaborator, not always rising to the level of cover credit. And this is delightful. It's a delightful novel. It's really, of course, it's I, Judas, but after the first 3 chapters, it ends up being the story of Jesus. How could it not be? And it's very enjoyable. I still reread it, but I had, the last time I reread it, I found a hardcover, I think at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston for $1, and read it that way instead of putting any stress on this thing, although the hardcover doesn't have this cover, which I really like. Then, oh no! Oh no! All right. It's not only another Star Trek novel, but it's the epicenter of all my Star Trek ramblings. It's The Price of the Phoenix by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbra, in which, as I have described now far too many times for the rest of you, a villain named Omni creates a process of perfectly duplicating an individual and sets it loose on the galaxy, or plans to, figuring that it's the perfect device for subversion and upheaval and blackmail. And the first person he uses it on is Jim Kirk. And that is The Price of the Phoenix. That is what this book is entirely about. What would happen if there were 2 Jim Kirks, and not one who's all evil and one who's all good, not one who has a limited lifespan, but just 2 people who are exactly the same person. What would you do then? And it's terrific, absolutely terrific. It has all sorts of meditations on the philosophy of the Federation. It has all sorts of, the characters talk in a great combination of telegraphic tough guy speech and Humean philosophy. It has a great realization of a Star Trek fan character favorite, the female Romulan commander from the Enterprise incident. We only see her once, but she's portrayed so perfectly and is so intriguing on her own that fans have never had enough of her. They never let her go. She's in all the books. And she's realized in this book just fantastically, just amazing. And also, Omni is, in addition to being a villain and a technological genius, he's also a giant. He's 7 feet tall, and he's obviously not human. And he's incredibly strong, physically strong. The book has a holdover from the old days of Star Trek fan fiction, what would now be called fan fiction. In those old days, in the old dot matrix fanzine days, fans showed a marked tendency for torturing their favorite characters. Torture turns up far more often than you would think. Mostly Spock, but not only him, also Kirk. There was a sadomasochistic streak that ran throughout a lot of very early Star Trek fiction that no one has really examined, and I'm glad of that. And this book has a slight holdover from that, in that there's a protracted sequence where Omni decides that he is going to physically break Captain Kirk in one-on-one combat, and does. And because there's no way not to. As the book makes clear, you can gamble, and you can get lucky, and you can maneuver, and you can have leverage or circumstance on your side, but if you're trapped in a room, intentionally locked in a bare room with someone 5 times your strength, the ending is assured. that scene, it's painful and intriguing at the same time to read, but it happens relatively early in the book, and of course sets up an incredible building tension throughout the book, while all the philosophical stuff is being discussed and the technological stuff, what to do with this process and this duplicate Kirk. All throughout the book, bubbling underneath all that, for any fan, and Sandra Marchek and Myrna Culbreath knew it quite well and stoked it very intentionally, is the expectation that at the end of the book, no matter what else happens, Spock, who's also much stronger than a human being, is going to physically fight Omni, and they do, and it's awesome. it's I hate to say it because it's so primitive and silly, but it's so adolescent, but it's incredibly satisfying. Anyway, let's move on from The Price of the Phoenix to a novel that I've mentioned. I don't know that I've ever shown it. This is Jeremy Levin. This is Satan, His Psychotherapy and Cure by the unfortunate Dr. Castor, JSPS, which stands for Just Some Poor Schmuck, in which a psychiatrist accesses Satan on his computer and begins to psychoanalyze him, because Satan, turns out, is very chatty. There's quite a bit to say. But there is so much else going on in this novel. This was sort of a companion, just outburst of creativity from Jeremy Levin, in addition to his novel Creator, which we saw on this library tour. It's here somewhere. I was going to grab it, but God knows where it's gone to. This is a terrific book. Just terrific, in a way that is totally unremembered. No one reads Jeremy Levin, either Creator or this book. And one of the funniest things about it, I mean, it's not a funny book. That premise sounds a little funny, and so does the title, but there's actually a lot of grim, horrible psychodramas going on in the course of this thing. One character in particular, who has a large, it is revealed late in the book, has a large collection of a certain something that you're really not supposed to collect. But one of the funniest things about the book that you only realize when you're maybe halfway through, I'm kind of dim, so I didn't realize until I was done with my first reading, is that by far the nicest and most decent person in the book is Satan. Then we have this is another novel by an author I've praised. This is The Floating Gods by M. John Harrison. Another of these great old Timescape paperbacks. The Floating Gods is not in. I showed you the M. John Harrison trade paperback collection that came out about 20 years ago. Really nice looking thing. I don't think there's ever been a second collection, and this book is not in that collection. And there are a couple of other things that aren't too. So if I want to read this, I have to read it in this mass market. That's why I probably have 2 or 3 copies of it, because I grab it whenever I can, because I know there's a good chance that the reading of one of those copies will destroy it. And this is just these Viraconium novels take place in the city of Viraconium, which is part of the late afternoon cultures. It is such an old and jaded city that time itself happens in suburbs and fractures and fragments, and it's virtually impossible to describe. It's been a problem of mine recommending these things for 40 years. They're virtually impossible to describe. Usually what I've done in the past is simply hand a copy to somebody, and when they get around to reading it, they invariably love it, but they also can't really describe it. So I highly recommend, if you are in a used bookstore and you see a copy of the Viraconium novels of M. John Harrison in these old Timescape paperbacks, and you like high fantasy, grab it and read it. You'll never have read anything like it before. This next one is Battered, whatever it is. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, this is... Oh, I don't have anything to show you. I'll show you the frontispiece here. This is Suetonius. His Lives of the Caesars. And this is volume 1, which includes everybody up to Tiberius. I think this is Augustus and Tiberius. Maybe Caligula is in here as well. And this is the old Loeb Classical Library. This is 100 years old. This is where you have the Latin on one side and the English on the other. The English is usually uninspired, but it's a really good, cheap way to get an authoritative Latin text if that's what you need. And at the time, a long time ago, that is what I needed, because a friend of mine, asked me to translate Suetonius' Life of Tiberius Caesar with footnotes in an original work of my own. And back then, I wasn't writing. I was a bookstore clerk. But I yearned to write. I hungered to write. I used to ask people if they wanted me to write something for them. and word of that got around, and a friend of mine asked for an original translation, and I needed the lobe to do it because I didn't have any all Latin. That sound you hear is my puppy furiously destroying something. Then let's see here. What have we got here? More Star Trek. Oh my god! This is. Do you remember in the last library tour? I think it was the last one. I showed you Star Trek: The New Voyages, Volume 2, and before that we'd seen Volume 1, and I said there were no others. That's a collection series by Sandra Marshak and Murray Calbreth in which they go to authors and they go to fans and they assemble Star Trek fan fiction. Those 2 volumes, and then there was nothing else. But later, much later, when Star Trek was a corporate thing, overseen by lawyers and whatnot, they did it. Pocketbooks did it again in something that lasted a lot longer. This is actually a big series. I don't know how many of them I have. And it was Strange New Worlds. Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Where people were encouraged to submit short stories from any period of Star Trek's long continuity. This one, for instance, is, I believe this is the first volume. And it has, let's see here, 4 from the real Star Trek, 7 from Star Trek The Boring Generation, 2 from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, 5 from Star Trek Voyager, and then a bunch of others. They had a bunch of splinter things that you could do that were really neat. And they had really good core group of editors. And let's see here. They give at the back of every volume. They give you the rules. And category 8, story disqualifications. Certain types of stories will be disqualified from consideration. A, any strong focusing on explicit sexual activity or graphic depictions of violence or sadism. Because even decades later, I guess, the oldest Star Trek fans on the editorial board knew that that demon might not be dead. I mean, they might get tons of stories of Kirk and Spock being tortured or torturing each other. B, any story that focuses on characters that are not past or present Star Trek regulars or familiar Star Trek guest characters. So you couldn't, for instance, write an entire... So you could, of course, but if you submitted it, they wouldn't consider it. A long story about a dilithium miner on some planet that never includes anybody from the show. It's just a glimpse of 23rd century history. Might be fascinating to read, but they don't want it. C, stories that deal with previously unestablished death of a Star Trek character or establish major facts or make major changes in the life of a major character. And here you can hear the corporate lawyers jumping their way in, as if we aren't going to know that it's fiction. For instance, a story that establishes a long-lost sibling or reveals the hidden passion 2 characters feel for each other. That might also be code. Because both of those things happen at the same time in the same Star Trek movie. I'm sure if you're a Star Trek fan, you know which movie I'm talking about. All of a sudden, 2 characters we've known for 50 years are suddenly in love with each other, and a major character suddenly has a brother. And D, stories that are based around common cliches such as hurt/comfort, where a character is injured and lovingly cared for, or, listen up you Star Wars fans, Mary Sue stories, in which a new character comes on ship and outdoes the crew. Add the science or command helm. I'm sure that they meant to specify, rather than extreme exalted Jedi Master lightsaber abilities with no training at all. Well, that's a rant for another time. Then what have we got here? Oh, okay. This is by Pam Service. This is a YA novel, believe it or not, a very old YA novel. This is The Reluctant God, in which, if you can tell from the cover, a super haughty ancient Egyptian pharaoh, a teenage pharaoh, wakes up in the present day and has adventures with the female protagonist in the novel, and I kind of liked it. It's totally predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen and exactly why it's going to happen. You even know the surprise MacGuffin ending. You know it all ahead of time, but then that hasn't changed in YA. So Then what's the next one here? Okay, all right. This is a 1980s, I think, a 1980s 1991, a reboot of the old Tom Swift adventure stories. This one is Aquatech Warriors. Can't imagine what attracted me to it. But one of the things I think is funny here, of course, our hero is in deadly danger. Why you would need a countdown clock on something at the bottom of the ocean, I don't know. But look, if you look closely, you'll see that not only is he chained to a bomb, and not only is there a shark, there's also this ray just happens to show up and add to the gang. like the shark wouldn't immediately eat the ray. One isn't bad enough. You need both of them to be threatening. Then the next one, oh, very good, very good. Okay, this is by two classic old science fiction fantasy hacks. This is Killer by David Drake and Carl Edward Wagner. Terrific science fiction novel about set in Imperial Rome, where a thing falls to Earth that is not a human and is not any kind of animal on Earth, and all the animals on Earth hate it on sight, and it seems to exist only to kill. And the tough as nails Roman animal herder, the guy who procures animals for the empire's entertainment, feels compelled, both professionally and also on a weird level personally, to figure out what this thing is and either capture or kill it. And if that plot sounds familiar, well, yeah. If you take that plot and you strip it just enough so that the result is not actionable, then you get Predator, and you make $1 billion in the movie theaters. But still, this is one heck of shoot 'em up science fiction novel. Just it had a reprint, a paperback reprint years ago that was so ugly that I just stick with looking for this one and grab it whenever I can. Actually, David Drake is worth reading no matter what he writes, and so is Carl Edward Wagner. Come to think of it, and then this is I just realized this is in the same stack. This is the same thing. David Wishart. This is his Germanicus novel, just another Corvinus mystery. This time about the Roman prince Germanicus who died suddenly, when would certainly have been emperor if he hadn't died suddenly. This the subject of 1 million books. His death is the subject of 1 million books. People trying to figure it out, because in I, Claudius by Robert Graves, where Graves just says that he was poisoned by his grandmother, and that's just stuck. It's just made people don't want to believe that if you suffered an injury in the ancient world, you were likely to die of it. No, it can't be that. It's got to be the skullduggery around every corner, especially if you're in line for the throne. And then the last book in this stack, we'll end as we began, with Star Trek. And this is a great Star Trek novel. This is Strangers from the Sky by Margaret Wander Bonanno. This is a novel about Earth's first contact with Vulcans. Long before Star Trek Generation showed us, or Star Trek The Next Generation showed us that, and long before Star Trek Enterprise showed us an alternate version of that, long before anything. This is not just a novel about Earth's first contact with Vulcans. It's also maybe not about that, because there seems to be a fracturing of time going on. People remember things differently, and it's wonderful, just wonderful. It is rich and atmospheric and character-driven. It's everything that a great Star Trek novel should be. I was so overjoyed. For a long time, Pocket did these extra thick Star Trek novels. I think they called them giant novels, and almost all of them were great. I'm sure, given the givens of this library tour, I'm sure that we will encounter them in these stacks of books. But in the meantime, if you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't read this, you really should, because it's delightful. And there you go. That is the latest installment in the Puppy Territory Library Tour, and I'm gonna go find the little terror and see what she's eating, and I'll be back soon. Thank you, BookTube.